welcome to the channel. This is Spellsinger and I'm going to carry on with my review of the Fighting Fantasy series. This is going to be book number 3. This is the Forest of Doom. If you've seen my earlier videos, what I'm going to try and do is run through them and follow this list. So starting with the title and book number. Then I'll have a read of the blurb so you can get an idea of what this one's all about. Then I'll drop into the plot and we'll go through that and have a look a bit closer, see what happens in this one. Then we'll look at the game mechanics and maybe take a look at the adventure sheet and see how that changes from the last. The artwork, I'll run the artwork through so you can get an idea of what this one looks like. And then I'll touch on some likes and dislikes. And if I can think of one, I'll put a fun fact in there before the summary and score out of 10. So let's kick off and have a look at this one. So yeah, The Forest of Doom. This was published in 1983 and it was by Ian Livingstone. So this is his solo effort. So obviously the last book we had Steve's first solo effort. Well, this is Sir Ian's. And the cover art here for this one was Ian McCaig. But all the interior artwork was done by Malcolm Barter. So like I said, I will run them through the video so you can have a proper look at this one. So let's have a read. I've got my copy here, so we'll have a read of the blurb and then you can find out what is going on in this one. So this is The Forest of Doom. Only the foolhardy would risk an encounter with the unknown perils that lurk in the murky depths of Darkwood Forest. Yet there is no alternative, for your quest is a desperate race against time to find the missing piece of the legendary Hammer of Stonebridge, fashioned by Dwarfs to protect the villagers of Stonebridge against their ancient doom. So that's the blurb. It kind of just gives you a little idea about what you're letting yourself in for. So let's hit the plot. Now this one, I think with this one it's safe to say that Ian and Steve were quite comfortable in that kind of fantasy genre. So this is their third outing now, and obviously felt that they were onto a winner with this world titan that they created. So this one, slightly different. You're not in a dungeon or a castle, you're out in the wilds of the forest. So that was quite a nice touch already. But yeah, the plot. So as the hero, you start off and you're kind of seeking your fortune by traveling around Alancia. You're felling your beasts and taking treasure. And then one night you're woken up by this kind of rustling in the hedges. And it is a dwarf who arrives speaking of some fabled hammer that is needed to unite his king's people. But failure of this will mean doom to this dwarven clan, because apparently they can't fight this evil without their fabled axe. And they're at the mercy of these hill trolls or something, I think it is, and if the hammer's not found, they're going to suffer the consequences. So before he passes away, this dwarf, he points to Darkwood Forest, and then that's apparently where the two halves of King Gillibrand's hammer are, and that's where they can be found. So not much is given away at the start, and you kind of get clues as you go along. So they can be gained within the forest, you know, as you sort of progress through the story. The good thing about this one is you start off, once you head into this forest, and you meet one of the ongoing and reoccurring characters called Yaztromo the Wizard. So his little treehouse is right at the front of this forest. So it's the first thing you find before you actually go into the forest. And like I say, he will show up a lot in this book. He informs you that an eagle basically stole this fabled hammer and was attacked and then dropped it into the forest. I think it was like a death hawk that was attacking this eagle or something. Anyway, two goblins snatch get this hammer once it falls into the forest, and they argue over who's actually going to take it. So to sort that, they separate it into the hammer head and the handle. So the hammer has like a bronze head, and I think is inscribed with the capital G, as is the handle. So very easy to recognize when you find it. The Forest of Doom introduces, like I say, the character of Yaztromo, who's like the Grand Wizard, like a Gandalf type character. So legend within Alancia. And he's, like I say, he's first time mentioned in this book, but will show up repeatedly, not just in Ian's books either, but in some of the other authors, which we'll look at a bit later on. The character shows up, and it's another example of the fighting fantasy world that's expanding. So the creators, Jackson and Livingston, their vision of Alancia is of a living, breathing place. It's a world that you can explore, and as such, you need a couple of notable characters to show up every so often to kind of add some credence to that. So yeah, returning figure to make it a little bit more believable. This Forest of Doom, it sets you up as kind of like the great saviour of the dwarves. So you know your mission, you have to find these two pieces of this hammerhead, work your way through the forest, and at the end of the forest it's the path to Stonebridge where the dwarves are from, and that's where you can give it back to them so they can fight their war. You best provide both halves of this hammer, give it to King Gillibrand. And that is basically the story. So it's not a complicated narrative. It's quite straightforward, but that sometimes makes for a really good story. You know exactly what you need to do. You can just crack on with it. Let's have a look at the game mechanics on this one. They're not massively different from the previous book, the Citadel of Chaos, where you had a list of spells. In this one, you have a list of items, and you can get them right at the start. It's kind of like a nod to the D&D world. When you go to this tower of this treehouse of Yastroma at the start, you basically have a list of items, and you have a certain amount of gold, and you can buy them off the bat instead of scrounging around the forest trying to find them, which is a nice little change. It is, it's an item list. I think it's about 30 odd items on there, and they're all used in the adventure, which is quite nice. Different kind of items, potions, and all kinds of random stuff. Some of the items are essential to find the hammer, but you can still get those later on if you don't buy them. They're just hard to find. You can buy most of with your 30 odd gold coins, I think you can actually buy most of the stuff that's on there, on that list. And with some careful kind of decision making, you can get hold of as many as 11 items later on anyway. So it's not the end of the world if you don't pick the right items. In this one, the initial stats, they're not hugely important, a bit like Citadel of Chaos. The combat is probably the least important factor in Forest of Doom, because you have so many provisions at the start, and you can buy other provisions from old Yazzie. So that's always a good thing. So stamina's not really a big deal. Even luck is not that important, although it comes in handy if you don't have the right item later on. So yeah, it's in a way, it's similar to Firetop Mountain. It's kind of like a mapping adventure, and it kind of borrows heavily from that kind of RPG, like I mentioned. You need all the manner of essential items to help you at the right moments, you know. So the majority of these are obtained at the start, and the start of the adventure with Yastroma's Tower, or Treehouse. And in some ways, Forest of Doom is kind of set up as a classic puzzle adventure, where the statistics are not necessarily a factor. Just to touch on the adventure sheet that you can see here, we've gone back to the standard one again. So we've got our skill, stamina, and luck, as always. We've got our equipment list, and you've got your jewels, gold, and potions as well. So no real change from book one, really, whereas book two, with Steve Jackson's effort, he obviously spruced up a little and introduced spells into the adventure sheet. But this one is going back to the bog standard sheet, so nothing really different to add on that one. Okay, let's take a look at some of the artwork. This one, being in the forest, as you would imagine, there's a lot of kind of passive scenery imagery, which is quite nice, and there's some quite notable characters that show up in the artwork. There's one that sticks in my mind. This one here is this kind of barbarian pegged into the ground, and there's quite a lot of detail there of his sort of muscular kind of body, and it's kind of, I don't know, always stuck in my mind as a kid how much detail goes into some of these images. But this one, spoiler alert, leads into a bit of a trap, actually. So you're supposed to think, oh, I better help this fella out. But yeah, you don't want to do that. Yeah, there's a really nice colour map at the start of the book as well, actually, which is more sort of for illustration rather than any use, because it's literally a map of the forest, but not in any detail of the paths of where you should take. So you basically have the tower at the start where Yastromir lives, the forest, and then Stonebridge in the far north. So it's more sort of for illustrative purposes, I think. The original cover is, like I said, from Ian McCaig. It's a lot better than the Citadel of Chaos front cover, I feel. And it kind of depicts this shapeshifter who shows up in the book a bit later. But this iconic picture of this shapeshifter is, I think, a bit of a fan favourite with a lot of the readers of these books. It really does stand out and looks really great. That kind of sinister brown cloak and hood that he wears. Yeah. The artwork in general is of very high quality. And it's quite nice to have something a little bit different from Russ Nicholson's style as well. So likes and dislikes for this one. Like the chance to return back to the beginning at the end if you don't have both parts of the hammer. First time, as far as I know, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but first time that you actually get this option. So if you get to the end, if you get to Stonebridge and you only have one or no pieces of this hammer, they basically tell you to go back, so you can follow this path back around the outside of the forest to Yastromir's tower and start again. It doesn't actually say in the instructions where you carry on with the same character stats, but I assume you do. And you can head back to the tower, buy some more stuff from Yastromir and have another go. And you can keep doing that until you have had enough or you finish it. I quite like that. It's got a few issues, which I'll mention in a minute, but I think as a game mechanic or option, it's quite a nice little feature. So yeah, get a second chance. I like the atmosphere in this one as well. It's really nice to be out of the dungeon, and like I said, the artwork helps you believe that you are in this living, breathing forest, which is a nice change from the first two books. Yeah, so I think with a dislike, you're forced into kind of a linear route, quite a linear path in this one. If you want to actually complete it, there really is only one set path. There's no open world which leads to a choke point where you can get the essential item and then branch off again, another choke point and the second essential item. It's really just one path. If you deviate from that, you won't find both parts of the hammer. So that's a bit of a shame, because there's a lot going on in this book, a lot happening in the forest, and if you don't take that path, you're going to miss a lot of stuff. But yeah. Yes, a bit linear for my liking. Perhaps could have had a chance to get, like I say, both parts of the hammer at a choke point, but not this time. And the only other thing was, like I mentioned with my because you can carry on at the end and try a second time, there are some consistency issues. So when you arrive back at Yastromir's tower for the second time, he doesn't recognise you. All it could have taken to fix that was have an additional reference where it's very similar to that initial reference where you meet Yastromir, but he recognises you. He says, oh, okay, you're back. Bad luck. Here's some more items, and have another crack at it. It would have taken one extra reference to have done that. But then, of course, where do you stop? Because if you take a similar route, you're going to find all the creatures that you killed in the first round and so on. So yeah, I can see why people didn't carry on with this, but I really like it. And if you can look beyond the consistency issues, then it's not really a big deal. So that's the likes and dislikes. Fun fact on this one, the book can be considered almost a sequel to Caverns of the Snow, which we'll look at a bit later. And depending on your readers or your interpretation, it could also be a prequel to Temple of Terror, which is another one that's coming up. So you can already see they're laying the groundwork for this world of Titan and how it's all interlinked. So yeah, quite like that. Right, let's do a summary and score on this one. The first two books in the series went for like a traditional fantasy kind of creature adventure Forest of Doom lends itself to having more of a variety of encounters, travellers and inhabitants of this forest. And there are still your normal goblins and trolls and gremlins and whatever in the forest. And it's given a kind of believability with the inclusion of animals such as boars and bears and just animal life, the kind of things you would expect to see in a forest. And there's even hunters in there that are pursuing these animals. So instead of just randomly finding these encounters, you're actually finding other people that live there or are passing through the forest. So that just kind of makes it a little bit more believable. So characters passing through. There's even some bandits, I think, at some stage that show up. They're just there to take loot and get on with their day. What sets Forest of Doom apart from the previous two was the first adventure. It's the first adventure to be set in this kind of terrain. So, like I say, out of the dungeon, out of the castle, and out into the open. It's a nice change. It does a great job of conveying a believable geography as well, or a landscape, if you like. And then, as a reader, you find yourself within a kind of realistic habitat for once, something where you can associate with. Not many of us spend much time battling in dungeons or castles, but we've been through a forest, so it's something you can relate to quite nicely. The description of the forest is quite nice, and you've got your shrublands, your grass plains, hilly crags, there's valleys, fields. I think there's even an underground section, so Ian couldn't quite pull away from his dungeon altogether. There is a very small, I think you go into a well at some point, and there is a dungeon of about 10 references worth of reading with some gremlins inside. So that's quite a nice little touch. So this really helps with the believability of the story. But it can lead to awkward moments where you have already been somewhere, you double back and you're rereading the same paragraph. So it's got a couple of, like I say, inconsistencies, but something that can very easily be accepted. All in all, the design of the Forest of Doom is quite satisfying. It's quite believable. It's a welcome departure from the dungeon, like I said, and it kind of shows that it has a few more tricks up its sleeve yet. In the future books, we've got sea adventures, space adventures, you've got the whole sci-fi thing on, so they're just starting to think about branching out at this point. I imagine the creators, both of them, are just sort of thinking about where can we take this. So you still have your magic potions in this, which you were introduced to in Fire Top Mountain, and it also allows you, like I say, to purchase all those items at the start, so that's quite a nice setting. There's about 17 items in total, I think, that you can choose from, and like I mentioned, they're all used in the forest, so that's a really nice thing, instead of just having a whole list of items that aren't used, which can be a little bit frustrating for the reader. It's a bit of a fan favourite, this one, actually. It's one of my one in my top 10 potentially, but it's a bit of a fan favourite, this one. It's got a rich narrative, it's quite satisfying, and it's very replayable because there's so much to explore in this one that you can spend a lot of time going backwards and forwards through it if you're that obsessed with it, just trying to find everything. The ability to double back on yourself, like I've said, is a really fun little feature. And the lack of any, I think for me, the lack of any real notable creatures aside from this shape changer fellow on the front here, it stands out a little bit. There are a lot more normal encounters and characters in this one, so the creatures and monsters have sort of taken a bit of a back step, but that shape changer really stands out in my memory. The thing that's missing from this one, I think, is kind of like a climactic ending to it. So whereas in the first book you had Zagor to fight, and in the second book you had Balthus Dire, there's no real end boss, which is not a big problem. There's no a sort of final adversary, and you've got two options at the end. You either have the hammer or you don't, and that's fine. You're either going to save them or you won't. The book allows you, like I say, to travel back through the forest, but the ending's kind of a bit odd. It's sort of doesn't really feel like an ending as such. It's not entirely clear about what happens afterwards, but I assume with the full hammer, then the dwarves go on to save the day. But yeah, it's one of the more sort of stranger endings. I think based on everything that is in this book, everything that has going for it, I would say in terms of a score, I would probably give this one an 8. It really takes a step forward after the first 2 books. They obviously both have now written their own solo efforts, but they've done their joint book as well with book 1, and I think they've sort of got their feel for it, and they know where they're going, and this one really shows that they're starting to expand and try new ideas. So yeah, for that, I think an 8 is a good result for that. So yeah, that about wraps it up for this book. A really strong entry and very enjoyable. And if you like this, I'm going to carry on and do, I think what I'll probably do is do maybe up to book 10, and then maybe look at some other books, maybe some of the Way of the Tiger or Sagard, or maybe the Cluster of Echoes, and then come back to these and maybe do another 10 or something like that. We'll see what you think. Maybe leave a comment if you want me to do something different, or if you want me to add something that I'm missing. And if you really like it, then just maybe subscribe, and then you get your notifications. So. But yeah, thank you very much. I will leave you, and I'm going to do the next book very soon. Actually, I'm going to try and get that one in a bit quicker, which will be book 4, The Starship Traveller. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.